Welcome everybody to the Ronnie Perez podcast, episode 1, from Daniel to Darius, part 1. Thanks guys, hope you enjoy it. Hi everyone, welcome to the Ronnie Perez podcast. Here we are on day 1, episode 1. This is my very first episode, Ronnie Perez podcast. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. Make sure to like and subscribe for future episodes. This, as you saw from the intro, is going to be a series, 3-part series called From Daniel to Darius. And we're going to go through what the biblical accounts are of the story of Daniel, and then use some secular sources as well, and kind of go through in part 1 the what happens before Daniel, the precursor events. Then part 2, the book of Daniel, right, what actually happens in there. And then part 3 will be what happens afterward with the Achaemenid Persian Empire. If you're a fan of 300 and 300 Rise of an Empire, you're going to see some of the guys in these movies in this podcast as well, and the histories. And it's going to be fantastic. So my goal is to bring history in a nice, fun, and exciting way and kind of tell you a story as opposed to having you read a bunch of sources here. Speaking about sources, we've got a couple great ones. We have a guy from Greece called Xenophon. And Xenophon is kind of a Greek historian. He goes through and he kind of chronicles the histories of these ancient peoples. He writes it after the fact. Then we have Herodotus, who lived through some of the events we're going to talk about in part 3. He was a child back then, and he grew up seeing these things kind of in plays and in popular culture, and he gets very interested and he writes about them later on. But he's writing from a kind of place where he's thinking back and seeing it back at the events and writing after the fact as well. Some of our modern scholars, like Susan Bauer, is here, as well as one of our other sources, Dr. Martin J. Daugherty, who have dedicated their entire careers to studying ancient history. Obviously, I'm not a historian. I'm just a fan of history, and we're going to go through and see what they thought about these events as well. So we're going to cover kind of the Assyrian Empire, okay? We're going to cover the Babylonian rulers in this episode, or at least one of the great ones. And we're going to touch a little bit on Daniel. But first, a map. Here we go. We have a map of the ancient kingdom of Assyria. Okay. You're going to see here Assyria, the capital being Nineveh, if you've heard of that country in the Bible at some point, Nineveh. Okay, we have the Median Empire, or the Mede area. That's to the west. And then down southwest, you're going to see Elam, or the Elamites are going to be at. If you go... that was southeast. If you go west, you're going to see Israel and Judah, okay, Damascus as well, being one of the main cities. South of Assyria, you're going to see Babylon, a very important place in Babylon as well. If you know about Abraham, And then we're going to go, if we go relatively pretty west, we're going to see Egypt, who's away from the fighting. Very important that Egypt's kind of away from the fighting, doing their own thing in Africa. And they're going to be kind of in that region there. So coming back to me here, hello, we're going to talk about the 5 major powers. What are the 5 major players that are going on in this time period, in this epoch? Who are the 5 major guys that are pretty much controlling the political landscape of the Middle East at this point? So we're going to begin with the Assyrian Empire. These guys are the biggest, the baddest empire at this point so far. They're going to control the area with a dominant hand, a very strong, firm hand. If you've got a bunch of unruly kids who you are in charge of, and they're running and they're fighting and they're breaking stuff, you're going to be kind of a little bit stronger-handed with them. They're going to be, hey guys, sit down, be quiet. And that's kind of what Assyria does. They rule with an iron fist. And they do some pretty horrible things as well. So Assyria, pretty bad empire. You're going to see some of the horrible things they do. So number 2 is Egypt. If you saw on the map, you saw that Egypt is pretty far from everybody else. Also, Egypt has this great thing called the Nile, and the Nile runs through Egypt, fertilizing its land, making them an economic powerhouse. When you don't have to worry about farming for your food, if you're going to live the next day, you can do some pretty great things, and we'll talk a lot about Egypt. Fun fact, by this time, the pyramids, we're talking about the year about 700, around 700 BCE. By this time, the pyramids are already ruins. You know, we think about Egypt, oh, the pyramids are new, they're great. No, at this point in history, the pyramids are ruined. So imagine, they were built way before this time, thousands of years before. So it's incredible that by this time, people are like, wonder how these got here. So that tells you how old they are compared to now. So we're talking about some of these kings were digging up civilizations that were way older than they were, and they had no memory of them. So we'll talk about that, but that's just crazy how ancient the world really is. So that's the second one, Egypt. The third one, Babylon. So Babylon is going to be a place where you're going to see a lot of resistance against the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire, towards the end of the year, I'm going to say around here, when Nebuchadnezzar, around 600 BCE, when the Assyrian Empire reached around 600 BCE, Babylon starts to rise, okay? And Babylon at this point, during the Assyrian reign, is kind of a vassal state. They kind of pay their taxes, they pay homage to the Assyrian kings, and they kind of do that. But also, they're going to be kind of a thorn in the side of the Assyrian Empire, along with Egypt. We talked about Elam, right? And the number 4 major power here is the Elamites, or Elam, who have been traditionally oppressed by the Assyrians. And they're kind of that guy who's been like bullied, you know, a lot, and at the end he just goes crazy and kills everyone, or starts a big fight. Well, that's kind of Elam. And the Medes. Number 5, the Medes. The Medes are kind of a subservient worker class of people. They describe them in the ancient histories as kind of like a traditional underdog, and they're kind of like put to the side. They will also start a ruckus along with some of the other powers. So you're going to see that traditionally, a lot of these guys are not big fans of the Assyrian Empire. This Assyrian relief here just depicts kind of some of the art that you would see in Assyria. It's brutal, brutal, brutal art. It's made to be kind of done in a way to where you are seeing kind of the effects of crossing the Assyrians. You know, here in this one, you see kind of a beheading, you know, and kind of a militaristic. This would be in the lobby of the king. And prospectively, you might be a king who's maybe trying out or going there to ask for something, or you're going there to say how disgruntled you are. You're sitting in his lobby and you're seeing this. This is what you're seeing. So back to me here. Hello. The Assyrians were kind of a very harsh people, and again, not just the Bible tells us this, but the histories. Susan Bauer describes, and again in Kings it talks about this, and also in the book of Judges it talks about this, where the Assyrians and these people of this area would come into battle with you, they defeat you, and then all of your lords, all of your fighters, all of your champions, all of your nobility would get their thumbs just cut off, so they could never grasp a sword. They would eat scraps, you know. This is the kingdom where they would build a wall of dead bodies on the way for you to come see that kingdom. That way you were dissuaded from rebellion. There was one Jewish king that crossed the Assyrians, and that Assyrian commander, after he defeated that Jewish king, had his children in front of him, killed his children in front of him, and then took out his eyes. So the last thing he saw was his children being tortured and killed, and then his eyes were put out. So that was the last image you could ever see. It's kind of like that extra little bite. So these guys were not fun people, but again, they're ruling a bunch of rowdy kids. So they have to have that strong hand to keep everybody else in line and paying their taxes, right? So at this point in 733 BCE, a king called Tilgath-Pileser. Tilgath-Pileser was one of the kings that defeated the northern kingdom of Israel. Let's look at a map here. All right, here's the map. Take a look at that map. You're going to see the northern kingdom. Again, if you know some of your Israelite history, you know that Solomon's kingdom, after his sons come along, they have a big rebellion and the kingdom is divided. The southern kingdom, called the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, are just called Judah. And the northern kingdom is called Israel in the Bible. But the northern kingdom, for their sins, was let to be put into the hands of the Assyrians. So the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom. That was King Shalmaneser. And King Shalmaneser conquered and besieged the capital of Israel and took it after 3 years of fighting. That's in 2 Kings 18:9 through 12. And it talks about how Isaiah talks about how in the book of Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5, how the Assyrians are the holy instrument of God to punish the northern kingdom for their crimes and their idolatry, their paganism. Again, the northern ones are the ones that were bad in the eyes of the Lord, and the southern ones, Judah and Benjamin, were the good ones. So Assyria is that hand of retribution on them. And we see that Isaiah talks about that. And again, more of Isaiah and more of Daniel, they all confirm in chapter 7, 18, chapter 8, 7, chapter 9, 11 of Isaiah. It talks about how the Assyrians are bringing the pain to northern Israel because of those sins they've committed. So moving on from that, now we go to a part that's a really crazy story in the Bible, Sennacherib. King Sennacherib, who is one of the great kings of the Assyrian Empire, many conquests, as Dr. Martin J. Dodry writes, a lot of great conquests that he has, military commander, an army of 40,000 men he had at his disposal, armed professional warriors. The Assyrians are the first ones to engage cavalry and engage heavy infantry with spears, put them into formations and use them in the field of battle, use battle tactics like flanking, envelopment. These tactics are for the first time used by the Assyrians, and they're mighty good at fighting. So this king Sennacherib brings his 40,000 man army. And let's just see and hear what he says. This is from an Assyrian proclamation given to all around the empire, made its way all through the empire. This is what Sennacherib says about King Hezekiah. He says, "As for the kingdom of Judah, Hezekiah, who had not submitted to my authority, I besieged and captured 46 of his fortified cities, along with many smaller towns, taken in battle with my battering rams, siege weapons." Okay? "I took as plunder 200,000 people," probably exaggerated, "both small and great, male and female, along with a great number of animals, including horses, mules, donkeys, camels, oxen, and sheep. As for Hezekiah, I shut him up like a caged bird in the royal city of Jerusalem. I then constructed a series of fortifications around him, and I did not allow anybody to come out of the city gates. His towns, which I captured, I gave to the kings of Ashdod, Ekron, and Gaza." So here he's kind of proclaiming and boasting how he beat this guy in battle and killed everyone and destroyed it. When in reality, he took all of Israel, all of Judah, and now in his proclamation, he's outside of Jerusalem. He hasn't entered the holy city. At this point, the Bible tells us that King Hezekiah prayed to God. And in Isaiah 36:4, it talks about this, how he prayed to God and prayed and fasted. And God never let the Assyrian commander and this king enter Jerusalem. Instead, God killed 185,000 of the Assyrian forces in one night. Numbers might be a bit off, okay? But according to this, and Sennacherib was forced to flee to Nineveh, okay, where he was killed by one of his own sons. That's the biblical description. Herodotus confirms this. The numbers are skewed here, but Herodotus confirms a much smaller force, around 40,000 men strong. And he talks about this, and Herodotus says that it was plagues and rats and disease that caused this. There's a proclamation by them, or by Herodotus, saying that the rats had gnawed through the shields and through the spears of the Assyrian army, and they were forced to retreat back to Nineveh. So Herodotus kind of confirms this story here, and that's kind of what he says. Now let's fast forward 100 years. Okay, fast forward 100 years, the Assyrian Empire might be in a bit of a decline, and the Babylonian rulers are now kind of running the show in this area. And Nebuchadnezzar is kind of one of these guys, and he's the king in 605 BCE. So Nebuchadnezzar, one of the great military tacticians of the Babylonian Empire, again, he's coming through here, and he's pretty much showing his might. He has a lot of horrible stories of his kind of rule and his kind of attacking, of these neighboring cities. And we're going to go over, to finish off here with this first episode, the conquest of Judah and what that means and how that actually happened. So in 605, or they're around 601 actually, we see that Nebuchadnezzar launches a failed attack against the Nile. He's newly king. He launches an attack against the Nile and he fails. He's not able to completely take over Egypt. And at this point, the king who was there, King Joachim of the Jews, he kind of at this point says, you know what, the king failed. Well, maybe we can team up and we can go and attack him and we can win, right? So King Joachim pretty much does this, and he's like, you know what, let's get some of the Egyptians together, let's get some of these other guys together, and let's see what we can do. And he begins his kind of revolt, and he stops paying his taxes. At this point, stopping paying your taxes as a vassal lord to the king here, stopping paying your taxes, that's a big deal. It's kind of like you're kind of saying, oh, we're not friends anymore, we're cut off, we're not going to support you, we're not supporting us, we're done. At this point, that happens, and Nebuchadnezzar, on his way back to Nineveh, says, you know what, it's on. I couldn't beat the Egyptians, but I've got 40,000 men, and I'm going for the Israelites. At this point, he easily takes Judah and removes this king and replaces him with a king called Zechariah. Now, Zechariah is put as king in 597 BCE, and then Nebuchadnezzar returns with all of his gold, all of his spoils, back to Nineveh to hang out and kind of pass the summer there. Now, Zechariah had just been put in power by this king. He's kind of salty, as the youth would say, and he's kind of upset, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to get back, and I'm going to restore Israel. Let's go ahead and have an alliance. So he calls the Pharaoh Metachius II, and he encourages this Pharaoh to join forces with him, and he says yes. He also goes and gets Egypt, Edom, Moab, and Ammon on his side and gets them to also engage in this battle. Okay, so now you've got a multiple people alliance in 591 BCE. Nebuchadnezzar hears about this, Herodotus says, and he kind of says, you know what, it's on. Let's go ahead, let's go to war. And he starts to come down. He starts to proclaim that he's coming down, kind of to scare him. Okay, now you've got a 40,000 man professional force. Again, we talked about them being great military tacticians, having cavalry, having real military warfare, battering rams, siege engines, and being able to really take the fight to them. Israel at this point, it's unlucky if they ever had anything more than 10,000 lightly armed men. Israel was never considered a major dominant military force in this area, and definitely the kings of Babylon easily take them. So imagine you're sitting at the walls, okay? You're sitting at the walls, and you hear these envoys come up, and these envoys are speaking to you in the native tongue, not in Aramaic, but they're speaking to you in the native tongue of the Israelites, okay? Because they would know that, and they say to him, "Hey, every one of your walls, they're all going to die." And this is in close proximity to the civilians of this area. And Susan Bauer talks about this and says, "Hey guys, just wanted to let you know, everyone here, you're all going to die. Have fun. Get ready for the battle we're going to have." And Zechariah says, "Hey guys, can you speak to me in a different language so my people don't hear it?" And I'm like, "Nah, your people are going to hear it, and they're going to be afraid." Zechariah promptly sends some money over there. Doesn't work. He still wants to go to war. The fall of Jerusalem and the fall of Judah happens around 588 BCE. Think that you're a civilian at this point, and you're sitting at these walls, and there's an oncoming enemy force to destroy you and kill your children and your family. You're scared. You're kind of sitting here, there's no water. A giant army has now surrounded you and is cutting off all food to your city. No food, you're starving at this point. Let's go back a little bit and talk about Jeremiah. He's a contemporary of this time. Jeremiah was put in jail by King Zechariah because he prophesied that this would happen. He goes, "No way, you're going to jail. Enjoy." And he puts Jeremiah in jail. That's where he writes the book of Lamentations. And in Lamentations 4:10, it says that starving mothers boiled their children and ate them. That tells you the despair that's going on here. Now, as they're eating their children, and they're eating their pets and their horses and stuff like that, I'm assuming they ate that stuff first before their children. And as they're swallowing their disease and not having any water and kind of being in a really bad place, out of nowhere comes the Egyptian army to save Israel. Egypt comes down with its chariots and its spearmen, its bowmen, its archers, in a great regal display, and they're coming down through Gaza. And Nebuchadnezzar hears this, and he goes, you know what? Let's go. He's motivated. Nebuchadnezzar takes his force away from Judah and goes south towards Gaza, where they get out of the sight lines of this city, Judah. And at this point, they're fighting, and we don't know what's going to happen. And let's pretend that you're a Jewish guy on the wall waiting for the victorious army to come. If it's Egypt, you're saved. If it's Nebuchadnezzar, you're dead. And I'm assuming they're seeing these guys come up, and they see a flag, and that flag is Babylonian. At this point, they're dismayed. They're distraught. They don't know what's going to happen. This Babylonian flag is coming, and it's the Babylonian army of Nebuchadnezzar coming back victorious from battle. You have to think that, wow, it's done. And yes, it was. Herodotus writes some of this. Martin Daugherty writes some of this. And we see that at this point, they take the walled city, the fortifications. They go through and they kill and they start stealing things and looting. The Babylonians are coming in, fighting in the streets, hand-to-hand fighting with swords. And at this point, the king retreats to the temple, where Nebuchadnezzar says, oh, you're in the temple? Cool, burn it down. This is the kind of ferocity he brought. That way, no one else would revolt against him. Nebuchadnezzar, with the king Zedekiah in the temple and his loyal guards, burnt the temple down and burnt them alive, says Dr. Daugherty in his book, Battles of the Bible. And at this point, we see that Nebuchadnezzar establishes his reign and establishes who he is and where he's at in kind of this area. Now, let's think about this. At this point, he takes the utensils, he takes the cups, he takes all of these things from the temple of Israel, and he takes their people with him back. The young nobility, the aristocratic people, the young people, takes them with him back to Babylon, where we know Daniel goes and 3 other youth, which you might have heard them, we'll cover them in part 2, go with him. And he takes these people. It's not uncommon. When you conquer a city, you take their people and you enslave them. And you take them to your side of the land. Take their gods with you, because believe that, like, if this is my table, my area, this is my god, Homer, and Homer is my god, they would take my god away from this table because he won't have any power anywhere else. He only has power in his lands. So Nebuchadnezzar takes the utensils of the temple with him back to Babylon. And we'll see what happens with that. Takes the people with him back to kind of subjugate them under his reign. That is part 1 of our series from Daniel to Darius, and we'll cover the rest in part 2. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you being here. Like and subscribe to this page, and I'll see you next week. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys, for joining me here on my first episode of the Ronnie Perez podcast, from Daniel to Darius, part 1. Stay tuned next week for part 2. Feel free to like and subscribe here on Facebook and YouTube. Follow me here on Facebook, and we can go ahead and see all of the updates. We can do this together. Hey, thanks, guys, again. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.